Hey everyone, how's it going? So what am I working on now? Well, I got that old Ford Escort up in the air. I'm going to be putting a motor in it. I have the junkyard motor here, and I started stripping some stuff down. We're going to be doing a timing belt on it. I figure now's a great time to show you doing a timing belt. These are simple timing belts, but I figure this is a great time to show you like a close-up on what's actually involved. So let's get to it. All right, so right here we have everything that we're looking at on this motor. And the one screw is already missing on this timing cover here. The timing belt could have been changed at some point in its life. I don't know. I haven't the slightest idea. But you got to start with pulling the timing cover on these. Reasonably simple. And yes, it was replaced at some point, but we don't know how old it is. So we are going to change it. Now this has an interesting setup. This is the old school style. This is a crank sensor. And this is what the crank sensor reads, is all of these notches here. See how there's a gap there that kind of indicates, or it tells a computer where the computer sees a gap knowing it is top dead center usually. Sometimes depending on how they set things up for the computer to read it, that could be something completely different, but that's usually what it is. So now what I want to do is I want to line this thing up and get it to top dead center. Excuse me. So there, you see that mark there? That's going to line up with that mark right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this thing probably by hand. Let's see. I have it strapped to the bench here. And it rotates pretty easy. I mean, I can tell it's got compression in it. We're just going to keep it going. I'm working against compression here, so. All right, so that's pretty darn close, as you see there. And then on this, the keyway should be roughly in the straight up and down position, which is where it roughly is. So what we're going to do is, I already took the crank bolt out. This thing should slide right off. Yes, it does. And as you can see on this one, it has that notch there, which lines up with that. It's off a little bit, but it's close enough at this point in time. So let's go ahead and let's work on getting this stuff changed over. Let me get the kit. I want to see what's actually in the kit. We have it here, but it's probably going to include this water pump. It might include this tensioner, but let's go find out. All right, so this kit does have the water pump, which has the tensioner as part of it. Didn't realize that. The gasket belt. It's a Continental kit. And there it is for you to see. And yeah, as you can see, the tensioner is already pre-loaded. Basically, it's compressed already. So you can have online instructions if you need them. This is so darn simple, there's really no need for it. So let's go ahead and let's start taking this thing apart. Where am I going to start? Get it? All right. Let me move you out of the way a little bit so this way I can actually work. Hopefully that's good and you can actually see what I'm doing. All right, so first things first, let's loosen up on this tensioner. It's a 13, at least it should be, might be a 12. And then, I don't know how strong this spring is. It's pretty strong. But you can see it does move. So I was able to put slack in it already. Tighten it back up. So now all I'm going to do is get a little slack in the belt so I can move the belt off. Well, like I said, the belt has been changed, which is good. That means this motor was maintained. But I don't know how old this belt is, so we're not going to take a chance. This thing could have been sitting in a junkyard for the last 20 years for all we know. All right, so that's off. So now, let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 10mm headed bolts that hold the water pump in place. Now, a lot of times what I'll do too is, I don't know if you could see it, the bolts for the water pump have a tendency to get corrosion on them. So I will actually run them along a wire wheel to clean them up. Oh, some coolant came out. All right, so that came off pretty cleanly. Got some silicone, it appears. But what we're going to do is we're going to clean this up. Let me go get a scraper. Let's scrape that. Wipe that off. I'm pretty impressed, actually, that it still has coolant in it, or at least some. Just trying to soak some of it up here. Not a big deal. All right, let's get a scraper. And a decent set of scrapers are invaluable. Let me pause this for a minute. All right, I'm going to be using my headlight, so hopefully it doesn't affect what you see. And oh, look, there's that missing 10mm nut for the front cover. All right, so that's basically it. I'm going to keep doing this until I get this thing clean. I don't know if I'm going to have you sit down and watch me do this entire thing. It'd be kind of boring. But let me get this all cleaned up. All right, this gasket was kind of kicking my fanny here, so I decided to use a Roloc disc. I usually don't use Roloc discs if I can avoid it. But this is cast iron, so I'm not too worried about it. Plus, I have like old worn out Roloc discs that I've held on to all these years, and I use those when I get in situations like this where I need to use it. So I'm just going to show you here with this little bit of gasket that's left over. And you got to be gentle with Roloc discs. I know some people go bananas with them, and you can really create some damage if you do. So, all right. Now, unfortunately, I can't do anything about the noise. There you go. As soon as you're done getting the gasket off, stop. You don't have to keep going, because a Roloc disc, even if it's dull like this one, you can create divots in the metal. So you want to avoid that. Let me get some brake clean so I can wipe that all off. All right, so just some trusty brake clean on a rag. Nothing spectacular. I always just wipe it down. That might have looked like gasket material at the bottom, but it wasn't. It was just grease that transferred up from down here, that's all. So just wipe it off. You don't have to go bananas. Now, let me get a blowgun, because I'm going to take a compressed air and blow this out and blow those holes out, the bolt holes. And then also, like I said, these bolts, if you look closely, I'm going to wire wheel them, clean them up. All right, so compressed air is almost a must in this industry. So now, a lot of times what I would do is I would actually glue the gasket to the pump, and I would use like contact cement or something. But it's really not necessary on this one, only because I have such a clean shot at it. If it was in the car, it might be a different story, but I figure since I'm doing it here, it's just much easier. So all I'm going to do, and I'll show you in a second, I'm catching the bolts through the water pump and the gasket. So I got two of the bolts in like that, and they're going through the gasket to hold it in place. Now I'm just going to lay it up in place and catch the screws. So pretty simple. Not that difficult. Stuff like this I will usually screw down by hand until we're all the way down. Now there is a torque on these, obviously. It's not super critical. So as you see, I'm going crisscross even all the way down. Until they get tight with my fingers. So now, it's down like that. We're just going to zap it. A little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little more, a little more, a little more, a little more. And like I said, this gun is not super strong. It's kind of worn out. Plus, I'm using a swivel socket. So the swivel socket makes a big difference too. All right, so let's go get the belt. And if you look here, you will see that it's off a tooth. That's fine for right now. I'll explain that in a second. Yeah, okay, let me get the belt. All right, hang on. All right, so now, lining up the belt. Some belts actually have marks on them that will line up to the marks on the pulleys, especially Subarus. But this is not a Subaru, as you can tell. Oops, actually, I should have done the bottom first, because the bottom has a recessed groove. So now, basically, the reason for leaving this off like a tooth like that is because you want to be able to get the belt on reasonably easy, like I just did, and you're going to have slack on this side. So now, I'm just going to use this to walk the crank over, like that. Okay. The cam is still off a little bit too, so we're just going to get it closer. So now, the belt has some tension on that side. And if you look, it's lined up here, lined up there. So now we can loosen this up, and that's a spring-loaded tensioner. Oops, let's get the right size on there. All right, you see how that moved? So now a lot of times what I'll do, don't have it too loose actually. It's still a bit loose. So what I'll do now is I'll actually put the crank pulley on and I'll rotate it to try to take up some tension on this side, and it'll allow the tensioner to move over just a little bit. So now it's still under the spring load itself, so the tension should be perfect. So now you tighten it up. So that should be absolutely perfect. The marks are all lined up, so as I always say, reverse procedure to install. So now you can actually put the upper cover on if you want, if it makes your life easier. Pretty simple. Let's see if I can find the nuts that I just had. There's one. That one was missing, if you recall. That's because it fell down and was actually laying there. Now you got to be careful too, because I've seen it to where a nut or a bolt will fall down and manage to work its way behind the cover. And if it does that, then you got a problem, because it'll have a tendency to hit the belt, and it can actually jump teeth or cut into the belt, ruin the belt, stuff like that. So there we go. That's all on. That goes on. That goes on. Now, sometimes you can't torque that. Sometimes you don't have the ability to hold the flywheel. Well, in a case like that, Tighten it up with a gun. Don't go bananas, because these were never super tight to begin with. But if you also look, I mean, look at the size of my finger compared to that bolt. It's not a huge difference. This is not a very large bolt. I mean, what is this? Maybe a 10, 11 millimeter, or a 9/16, something, 9/16, 3/8 or something along those sides. I don't know. But it's not super big. I'll go with like an 11 millimeter, maybe even a 12, but I don't even think it's that big. So now we're just gonna zip that down and be done with it. And I'm actually gonna use this gun, because I don't know, the 1/2-inch gun is kind of strong. The head of that bolt is a 3/4 or a 19 millimeter. So let's just get a 19 and we'll tighten that down. The reason I said 3/4 or a 19 is because I actually don't have a 3/4 and a 3/8 drive here. I have one at home, but not at the shop. And that's it. Good and tight. So that's pretty much it for that. So I'm good. I'm happy with that. We're all good. I just noticed it's missing an exhaust bolt here. So I'm going to have to look at that and see if that's broken or just missing. And it looks like it is just missing. Okay, not a big deal. All right, so pretty simple, pretty easy. Well, hopefully you got something out of that. If you did, hit that like button. If you could, please subscribe. Don't be afraid of timing belts. Most of the time, they're not that difficult. Most of the time. Some of them are a real bear. Let me shut this down for a second while the compressor's running. Yeah, so what I was saying was, don't be afraid of them, but take your time and be patient. If you don't have the skill set, then don't get involved. So it takes a certain amount of skill set, especially for the more intricate ones. But now what I was telling you about, like this nut here, let me just show you something real quick. See the gap in between the front cover, and you can actually see the belt in there? So had that been where that hole is, if that nut had fallen and managed to get in there and then fallen inside, it would have been game over. These are interference motors, and they are known for smashing valves. So, all right. So I'm just going to end it there. I'm also going to be replacing the clutch. I'm going to make a separate video on that. All right, guys. Hopefully you got something out of that. If you did, hit that like button. If you could, please subscribe. All right. Have a great day. Keep wrenching.